I took the job to get away from everything. My marriage had fallen apart over the winter, and by spring, I was sleeping on my brother's couch in Pittsburgh, drinking too much and staring at my phone at 2 in the morning, wondering if I should call her. I never did. Instead, I found a posting for a fire lookout position in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. 12 weeks, May through August, decent pay, complete isolation. It sounded perfect. Carl picked me up at the ranger station on a Monday morning in early May. He was in his late 50s, weathered face, hands like leather. He didn't talk much during the hour-long drive up the mountain roads, just pointed out a few landmarks and went over the basics. Watch for smoke. Radio check-ins twice a day, 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Hikers sometimes stop by. Keep the log updated. Last guy quit after 3 weeks, Carl said as we rounded a switchback, the forest pressing in on both sides. Why? I asked. Carl was quiet for a moment. Said it wasn't for him. Some people can't handle being alone that long. I almost told him I was looking forward to it, but something in his tone made me keep quiet. Hawthorne Peak Lookout came into view as we crested the final ridge. It was a steel tower, 7 stories tall, with a small cabin perched at the top like a bird's nest. The structure looked solid but old, built sometime in the 60s from the look of it. Stairs zigzagged up the framework, and I could see solar panels on the cabin's roof. Carl helped me carry my supplies up. By the time we reached the top, I was winded, but Carl barely seemed affected. The cabin was small but functional. A single bed, a propane stove, a small table with the radio equipment, and windows on all sides offering 360-degree views of endless forest. In the center of the room sat the firefinder, an old surveying device used to pinpoint smoke locations. You'll be fine, Carl said, showing me how to work the radio. Just follow the routine. Any problems, you call. Weather gets bad, you come down. Otherwise, I'll see you in 12 weeks. He left, and I watched through the binoculars as his truck disappeared down the mountain road. Then it was just me and the forest. The first night was peaceful. I made dinner on the propane stove, watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, and went to bed early. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no voices, no hum of electricity, just wind through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. I could get used to this, I thought. The first few days fell into an easy rhythm. I'd wake at dawn, make coffee, and do a complete sweep of the forest with the binoculars, dividing my view into quadrants and checking each systematically for any sign of smoke. Then breakfast, some reading, another sweep at noon. Radio check with Carl at 8 and 6. He always sounded the same. Hawthorne Peak, this is base. How's it looking up there? And I'd respond, base, this is Hawthorne Peak. All clear. On the third night, I heard the singing. It was past midnight. I'd been reading by lamplight when I heard it drifting through the open window, a child's voice singing something I didn't recognize. The melody was simple, almost haunting. What struck me was how clearly I could hear it. Sound carries strangely in the mountains, I knew that, but this sounded close. Yet when I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the forest below, I saw nothing but darkness and trees. The singing continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly, mid-phrase. I waited, listening, but heard nothing else. Campers, I decided. Maybe a family hiking one of the trails, kids still awake despite the late hour. I closed the window and went to bed, though it took me longer than usual to fall asleep. The second week started normally enough. I was getting better with the binoculars, learning the landscape, able to spot the hiking trails winding through the valleys below. On Tuesday morning, during my sweep, I saw something that made me pause. A figure stood between two trees, roughly 2 miles to the northeast. At first, I thought it was just a trick of shadow and light, but no, there was definitely someone there. They were perfectly still, facing in my direction. The distance made it hard to make out details, but something about the posture seemed off. Too rigid, maybe, or too tall. I watched for a few minutes, then looked away to check another section. When I swung the binoculars back, the figure was gone. Probably just a hiker, I told myself. Someone stopped to rest or check their map. But it bothered me more than it should have. That evening, during my 6 o'clock radio check, the connection was worse than usual. Static filled the speakers, and underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. Whispering, almost. Not English, at least I didn't think so. Just sounds that rose and fell like speech. "Base, this is Hawthorne Peak," I called. "Carl, you there?" Nothing but static and that strange whispering. I tried again. "Base, do you copy?" The static cut out abruptly, leaving only silence. Then Carl's voice came through, clear as day. "Sorry, Tyler. Had some interference. All good up there?" "Yeah," I said. "All clear. Just some weird static. Equipment's old. Let me know if it gets worse." We signed off, but I sat there for a while afterward, staring at the radio. On day 10, I had my first visitor. I spotted him coming up the trail around noon, a guy in his early 30s, good hiking gear, moving at a steady pace. By the time he reached the tower, I was waiting at the bottom. "Hell of a view from up there, I bet," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Scott." "Tyler." We shook. "You're the first person I've seen in a week and a half." "Yeah, the trails out here don't get much traffic. I'm doing a 3-day loop. Should be back through here day after tomorrow on my way out." We talked for a bit. Scott was from Ohio, did this kind of hiking trip every year. Seemed like a good guy, friendly and easy to talk to. Before he left though, he mentioned something that stuck with me. "Thought I saw someone following me yesterday evening," he said, adjusting his pack. "Kept catching glimpses of someone at the edge of the trail, just out of clear view. But whenever I'd stop and turn around, nobody there. Probably just my imagination." "Probably," I agreed, though I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. I watched through the binoculars as Scott hiked down the trail and disappeared into the forest. Then I went back to my routine. 2 days passed. Scott didn't come back. I told myself that wasn't unusual. Hikers change their plans all the time. Maybe he decided to take a different route out or extended his trip. There was no reason to worry. But on the second night after Scott left, I saw something that made worry seem inadequate. I was lying in bed, not quite asleep, when I heard movement outside. Not on the ground, in the trees. Something large was moving through the forest canopy, and I could hear branches creaking and snapping under its weight. The sound circled the tower, moving in a wide arc that took maybe 20 minutes to complete. I got up and looked out the windows, but the darkness was absolute. No moon that night. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. That steady movement through the treetops, circling, circling. It continued for hours. I didn't sleep, just sat at the table with a flashlight, listening as whatever it was moved around me in the darkness. Finally, maybe an hour before dawn, the sound stopped. I did my morning sweep with shaking hands. Everything looked normal, peaceful. Trees and mountains and morning mist rising from the valleys. During the 8 o'clock radio check, I almost told Carl what I'd heard. But what would I say? That something had been in the trees. He'd think the isolation was getting to me. Maybe it was. All clear, I told him, and left it at that. 3 days later, I saw the figure again. It was mid-afternoon, good light, and I was doing my routine sweep when I spotted it. Same general area as before, northeast of the tower, but closer this time. Maybe half a mile away, standing at the edge of a clearing. I adjusted the binoculars, trying to get a clear view. The figure was humanoid, but wrong. Even at this distance, I could see the proportions weren't right. The arms hung too long. The head was tilted at an odd angle, like someone had tried to position it normally, but didn't quite understand how heads were supposed to sit on shoulders. And it was facing the tower, facing me. My mouth went dry. I grabbed the radio, keyed the transmitter. "Base, this is Hawthorne Peak. Carl, you there?" While I waited for a response, I looked back through the binoculars. The figure was closer. Not by much, maybe 100 yards, but it had definitely moved. It now stood at the tree line, just a few 100 yards from the base of the tower. I hadn't looked away for more than 10 seconds. "Carl!" I shouted into the radio. "Carl, I need you to..." I looked through the binoculars again. The figure stood perfectly still, that wrong head tilted, those two long arms hanging at its sides. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape that suggested a face, like someone had drawn the general idea of a human without understanding the details. I watched it for 20 minutes, barely breathing. It never moved, just stood there, facing up at me. When I blinked, it was gone, not walked away, not ducked behind a tree, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I searched the entire area with the binoculars. Nothing, no sign of anything. That's when I started looking around the cabin more carefully. If the isolation was getting to me, I wanted to know if it had gotten to anyone else. The previous lookout had quit after 3 weeks, Carl had said. Maybe he'd left something behind, some kind of explanation. I found the journal wedged behind the firefinder, tucked into the narrow space between the device and the wall. It was a standard composition notebook, the kind you'd buy at any store. The first entry was dated 2 summers ago. The early entries were exactly what you'd expect. Weather conditions, notes about wildlife spotted, a few comments about the solitude being peaceful. The handwriting was neat, careful. Then, about 2 weeks in, things changed. They're watching from the North Ridge again. 3 of them today. I flipped forward, heart pounding. Rule: don't acknowledge them. If you act like you can't see them, they stay at a distance. Rule: don't go down after dark. They wait at the base of the tower. Rule: if you hear your name, do not answer. It's not who you think it is. The handwriting had become more frantic toward the end, less careful. I flipped to the final entry. There are more now. I counted 17 yesterday. They're getting bolder. I think they're coming tonight. If anyone finds this. The entry ended there, mid-sentence. No other pages had been torn out. That's just where it stopped. I sat at the table as the sun set, holding the journal, trying to decide what to do. I could call Carl, tell him everything, demand to be pulled off the mountain. But what would I say? That I'd seen a weird figure in the forest and found a crazy person's journal. The decision was made for me an hour later. Tyler. The voice came from outside, drifting up from the forest below. It sounded exactly like my ex-wife. Tyler, please. I need help. Tyler. I grabbed the binoculars with shaking hands and looked down at the tree line. She stood there, or something wearing her shape stood there. Same height, same long dark hair, same general build. But even from this distance, I could see the proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the way she stood too rigid, unnatural. It waved at me. Tyler, baby, please, I'm hurt. I need you. I backed away from the window, remembering the journal's warning. If you hear your name, do not answer. The voice continued for hours. Sometimes it was my ex-wife. Sometimes it was my mother, who died 3 years ago. Once it was Carl. Tyler, son, you need to come down from there. Something's wrong with you. Come down and we'll get you help. I sat in the dark cabin with my hands over my ears, and I didn't answer. Around 3 a.m, the voices finally stopped. The next morning, Carl responded to my 8 o'clock check-in. His voice sounded flat, emotionless in a way that immediately put me on edge. How are things at the tower, Tyler? I hesitated, then decided to test him. I've been seeing some strange things. People in the forest who don't move right. And last night I heard voices. Silence on the other end. It stretched on so long, I thought the connection had died. Then, what figures? What are you talking about? The things in the forest. They look like people, but they're not. They've been getting closer. Another long pause. Tyler, I think the isolation is getting to you. Why don't you come down? Take a break for a few days. Get some real food. Sleep in a real bed. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Too measured, too calm. And he hadn't used our standard sign-off phrase, the one we used at the end of every communication. You're probably right, I lied. I'll think about it. Hawthorne Peak out. I switched off the radio before he could respond. That night, they came for me. I saw them at sunset, figures emerging from the forest in a slow, steady stream. Dozens of them, all with those wrong proportions, that uncanny, almost but not quite human appearance. They formed a circle around the tower, standing motionless, all facing upward, all watching me. I counted them. 43. The sun finished setting, and darkness fell, but I could still see them down there. Not clearly, just shapes in the starlight, standing perfectly still. Then they started humming. It was low at first, barely audible. A single note held by 43 throats, rising from the circle around the tower. The sound built gradually, growing louder, and I realized they were all perfectly in sync. Not a single voice out of tune or out of time. I backed away from the windows and grabbed the table, dragging it over to the door, then the chair. The bed was bolted down, but I piled everything else I could move against the entrance. They hadn't tried to climb yet, but if they did, I wanted every second I could get. The humming continued for hours. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, hands clamped over my ears, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I crawled to the window and looked down. They were gone. I made my decision right then. I didn't care about the job, the pay, the contract I'd signed. I was leaving. As I threw my essentials into my backpack, I did one final sweep of the forest with the binoculars. That's when I saw it. Scott's backpack sat on the trail about a mile south, bright blue and impossible to miss. But there was no sign of Scott. I adjusted the focus, scanning the area around the backpack. One of them crouched nearby, hunched over something I couldn't quite see. As I watched, it straightened up and turned toward the tower, as if it knew I was watching. Then it moved back into the trees with that same wrong, too fluid motion. Scott had been gone for almost 2 weeks now. I'd talked to him 10 days ago. The thing I'd talked to hadn't been Scott. I grabbed my pack and the emergency radio and started down the tower stairs, moving fast, trying not to think about what I'd just realized. Halfway down, I saw them. 3 figures stood between the tower and the trail leading to the access road. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching me descend. I stopped on the stairs, mind racing. The journal had said, "Don't go down after dark," but it hadn't said anything about daytime. Maybe daylight gave me a chance. Maybe they had rules too. I changed direction, heading for the west side of the tower where I knew another trail started. It was longer, would take me miles out of my way, but it meant avoiding those things waiting below. My boots hit the ground and I ran. The trail was overgrown in places, harder to follow than the main path, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I could hear them moving through the forest. They didn't make much noise, no shouting or crashing through undergrowth, just a steady rustling of branches and the occasional snap of a twig. They were faster than me, much faster. I caught glimpses of them as I ran, shapes flickering between trees, keeping pace effortlessly. They were herding me, I realized, pushing me away from the access road, away from any chance of reaching help quickly. I made a split-second decision and left the trail, angling downslope through thick forest. Dangerous. I could break an ankle on the uneven ground, slam into a tree in my panic. But staying on the trail meant staying where they wanted me. The slope got steeper. I half ran, half slid down an embankment, branches whipping my face and arms. My foot hit a slick patch, and I went down hard, tumbling, crashing through undergrowth until I splashed into a creek at the bottom. I lay there gasping, every part of me aching. The sounds of pursuit had stopped. I forced myself up, listening. Water burbled over rocks. Birds called in the distance, but no rustling branches, no footsteps. I spotted a hollow log nearby, its opening just big enough for me to squeeze into. I crawled inside and waited, trying to control my breathing, listening for any sign of them. Minutes passed. 10, 15, 20. Then I heard her voice again. My ex-wife, very close now. "Tyler, baby, I know you're here. Come out, let me see you." Footsteps moved along the creek bank, slow, deliberate. Through the opening of the log, I could see legs walking past. They moved wrong, joints bending at slightly incorrect angles. "Please, Tyler, I'm worried about you. Everyone's worried. Just come out and we'll get you help." The footsteps stopped directly in front of the log. I held my breath, pressing myself against the back of the hollow, praying the darkness inside would hide me. "I know you're scared," the voice said, softer now, "but you don't have to be. We just want to help. We just want you to come home." An hour passed before I dared to move. My legs had cramped. My whole body ached from staying perfectly still. But finally, I crawled out of the log. No sign of them. I was miles from the tower now, down in the valleys where the forest grew thick. I could see sunlight slanting through the trees to the west, and I followed it, moving as quietly as I could. By evening, I reached the main road. I'd never been so happy to see asphalt in my life. I stood there on the shoulder, covered in dirt and scratches, my pack half open where I'd been grabbing things while running, and I laughed, actually laughed, though it came out sounding half hysterical. 20 minutes later, a logging truck came around the bend. The driver pulled over when he saw me waving. "You okay, buddy?" he asked through the window. "You look pretty rough." "Got sick up at the tower," I said. "Had to come down." He gave me a ride to the ranger station. On the way, he mentioned that the fire service had been trying to reach me. I'd missed my 6 o'clock check-in. Carl was waiting when we arrived. The real Carl, I could tell immediately. He looked concerned, not that flat emptiness the voice on the radio had carried. "Tyler, what the hell happened? You didn't answer your check-in." I almost told him everything right then. The figures, the voices, the journal, all of it. But I looked at his face. Honest, weathered, genuinely worried, and I knew how it would sound. "Found a journal," I said instead, "from the last lookout. Guy who quit after 3 weeks. He wrote some things that freaked me out." Carl's expression shifted. "Ethan, yeah, we found him wandering around down here after he left the tower. Wouldn't talk about what happened up there. Spent a few days in the hospital, then just left. Never came back for his pay or anything." "What did he tell you?" "Nothing. That's the thing. He wouldn't say a word about it. Doctor said maybe it was some kind of mental break from the isolation." Carl studied my face. "You want to file a report? Tell me what was in that journal." I thought about it. Thought about trying to explain the things I'd seen, the voices I'd heard, the figures circling the tower. Thought about how it would all sound written down in an official report. "No," I said finally. "I just couldn't handle the isolation. That's all." Carl nodded slowly. "Happens to more people than you'd think. Nothing to be ashamed of." I left the ranger station that evening, threw my pack in my car and started driving, not even waiting until morning. As I wound through the mountain roads, heading back towards civilization, I felt something unknot in my chest. I stopped for gas at a place just outside the national forest. While the tank filled, I went inside for coffee. That's when I saw the poster on the bulletin board. Missing person. The photo showed Scott, the hiker. Same friendly smile I remembered, but the date made my stomach drop. Missing since April 20th. Last seen in the Hawthorne Peak area. I talked to him on May 17th, almost a month later. Scott was already gone when he climbed up to my tower. Whatever I talked to had been wearing him like a costume, practicing getting the details close enough to fool someone who'd never met him before. My hands shook as I filled my coffee cup. I paid quickly and got back on the road. It was dusk by the time I left the mountains properly, dropping down into the foothills where towns started appearing again. The sun sat low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of red and orange. That's when I saw it. A figure stood at the side of the road, too tall, too rigid, arms hanging too long. As my car approached, it turned to watch me pass. I didn't slow down, didn't even breathe as I drove past it. In the rearview mirror, I saw it step onto the road. Then another figure emerged from the trees. Then another. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and didn't look back again. That was 4 months ago. I'm back in Pittsburgh now, staying with my brother again, but looking for my own place. I got a job at a warehouse, something with people around, noise, activity. Nothing isolated. Never again. But sometimes, late at night when the apartment is quiet, I hear my name being called. It sounds like my ex-wife, sometimes like my mother. Once, it sounded like Carl. I tell myself it's just memory playing tricks, just stress and lack of sleep. The mind processing trauma in strange ways. But I know that's not true. They haven't forgotten me. They're still up there at Hawthorne Peak, watching the empty tower, waiting for the next lookout to arrive. And when they do, maybe they'll find the journal I left behind. The one I started writing my second week there. The one I hid behind the firefinder before I ran. Maybe it'll help them. Or maybe, like Ethan's journal helped me, it'll just let them know what's coming, that they're being watched, that the things in the forest are patient and curious and learning how to be us. I don't sleep well anymore. Every shadow seems too tall. Every stranger's proportions seem slightly off. I catch myself studying people's faces, looking for that wrongness, that uncanny valley feeling that tells you something is mimicking human without quite understanding it. Last week, I thought I saw one downtown, just for a second. A figure in the crowd with arms that hung too long, a head tilted at that wrong angle. But when I looked again, there was nothing, just normal people going about their normal lives. Maybe I imagined it, or maybe they can leave the mountains when they want to. Maybe they're learning how to move among us, getting better at wearing our shapes, practicing until they can pass unnoticed in crowds. I don't know, and I'm too afraid to find out. All I know is that I'm never going back to those mountains, never going anywhere isolated again, because I've seen what waits in the empty places, watching from the shadows, and I know that if I ever hear my name called again, in a voice that sounds exactly right but feels exactly wrong, I won't answer. I won't answer, and I'll run, and I'll hope it's enough, because the rules that kept me alive at Hawthorne Peak might not work anymore. They're learning, and I don't think they're done with me yet.